On this point, over 200 years ago, in the summer of 1818, the discharged members of the British Army 99th Regiment of Foot, formerly the 100th Regiment, landed with their wives and families. From here, they traveled 20 miles inland to start a new life on the land that had been given to them for their service. This settlement would be known as Richmond, in honor of Charles Lennox, the 4th Duke of Richmond. That is the reason this location became known as Richmond Landing. Steady up. Attention! To the right. Base! Quick march!
Selling me coat, 50 for selling me blanket. If I live for a soldier again, the devil shall be my side. One day.
When the settlers first arrived, there was nothing resembling a road. They had to cut their way through a heavily wooded and swampy region. The first iteration of the Richmond Road was completed in November of 1818. Colonel Cockburn, the military officer responsible, described it as a track rather than a road. It remained a rough and rocky path for over a decade. It was swampy, even in the dry seasons, and it was completely impassable in the spring. Despite the condition, this road became the key route for the settlers of the military settlements of Richmond and Perth. They relied on it to receive supplies, news, and their pensions.
Some places are there, some places are not. Someone's complaining like it gets so wet, the corridors just float away. Yeah. So, well, and every wet hole they just kept adding more. Small thing that all there were corn farmers, sold it for a pint of rum. Had like that highly insulting. In most cases, they were either turfed out because they had going to school.
It is at this location, on the 28th of August, 1819, that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Richmond, Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces, died.
He's doing his big tour. He's going to come through and see all of the land he's just been appointed to look at and make recommendations for defense and infrastructure. And he's coming up into Richmond. He actually spends his last night, the last 2 nights of his life. He spends the first one at William Vaughan's house, which is actually my ancestor. And then the next night, of course, he spends the night at William Vaughan specifically because his wife is Lady Jane Copeland, who is Irish nobility, and the closest thing to nobility Ireland that Richmond, the town of Richmond, had at the time, other than the officer corps. Then, of course, he spends his last night at the would be named the Duke of Richmond Arms, which was a tavern named in his honor after he died. At the time, it was called the Masonic Arms. Then the following morning, they get him into a bateau. They're coming up the Jock River, And so the story goes, they get him here, which at the time was Chapman's farm. And of course, at the time, they didn't really know what. Something happened. He freaked out. He jumped out of the boat, swam up to the shore, ran up into the loft of the barn, and died in the loft of the barn here at Chapman's.
So not the most dignified place for a duke to pass.
No, not particularly, but death is never convenient now, is it?
Yeah. And also McCoy, so I've heard the local legend that the Duke of Richmond was bitten by a fox in the weeks before.
So this is one of the problems with the Duke of Richmond's death. It's not so much that there's a dearth of information, it's that there's too much, and too much is contradictory. So of course it was determined that the Duke of Richmond died of what at the time was called hydrophobia, which today we know as rabies. It's an absolutely horrifying way to die. I don't wish it on my worst enemy. Now, the story that's been commonly accepted was that he was bitten by a pet fox, which was infected with the disease. The big problem with that story is that there was no rabies here at the time. Okay. So if he was bitten by a fox that had rabies, the disease would have had to gone into hibernation in his body for quite some time. The other story which was commonly trotted out was that it was actually his dog, Blucher, who got into a fight with a rabid fox and then contracted rabies from the fox, and then later the dog bit the Duke, who then died of rabies. But again, the timeline would still require the disease to have been in hibernation for quite some time. One of the projects the Duke of Richmond was on when he came through this area was investigating allegations of corruption in the local government, which we know because a man named De Vreen kept very meticulous documents of the amount of fraud that was going on among the administration. And it just so happened that the Duke of Richmond met with some of the key ringleaders in that deception, in that theft of government funding, and then a few days later turned up dead before he got back to civilization. Can we say anything definitive? Absolutely not. But it is very convenient timing for someone.
So, possibility of some foul play, maybe even a 200-year-old unsolved mystery. What we know for sure is that the Duke was coming through, he was feeling unwell, but then deteriorated rapidly and expired at this location.
And died here at Chapman's farm.
Well, quite a story.
So if you go 1 mile past the Cooper Museum, you hit Fallowfield comes up first.
Owning land was an impossible dream for some, especially those who grew up in the strict hierarchical society of Ireland at the time. So many jumped at the opportunity to settle in Richmond. However, the background of many of the settlers' previous occupation had been soldier, and before that, weavers and tailors. Allegedly, some sold their plots of land as soon as they saw the overgrown, rocky, swampy state of the region. Those who chose to stick it out the following year cleared trees to plant crops. Breweries, distilleries, and sawmills were built. The soldiers grew old and had families. The Rideau Canal was built nearby and the road improved. The original buildings have been replaced, and the generations have replaced one another. The soldiers have stopped marching, yet time marches on.
And now to another I'll go. But I know there'll be good quarters waiting to welcome old rosin the bow. To welcome old rosin the bow. To welcome old rosin the bow. But I know there'll be good quarters waiting to welcome old rosin the bow.